Should be good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. I will call the May 11th Planning Commission meeting in the city of Oxford to order. Can I have approval of the agenda, a motion for the approval of the agenda? Any additions, changes, or corrections?
So moved.
All right. Dr. Prithridge moves. Do I have a second?
I think Steve moved as well, so.
All right, Mr. Dana is a second. We'll do a verbal vote, or actually raise your hand. All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, raise your hand.
This
And
is
the
Carla, I.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even think about that. Thank you very
There
much.
she is.
There she is. All right. Likewise, approval of the minutes from the April 13th meeting. They're in the packet. If there's any additions, changes, or corrections, Mr. Keebler.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Keebler and Mr. Dana has seconded it. If there's no further discussion or objection.
Just a comment that these are Lynn's last minutes, right? So she's not with us now, but she served many, many good minutes for the Planning Commission. So I wanted to note that.
Very, very well said. All those in favor of approving the minutes from April 13th, raise your hand. Please let the record reflect all commission members voted in the affirmative. At this time, we will entertain public comments related to items that are not on the agenda. Sam, do we have any members of the public?
We have Jessica Green wishing to speak.
Okay, we will yield the floor up to 3 minutes to Jessica. And Jessica is the Assistant City Manager. So just a point of clarification, if you could help us by stating if you're speaking as a citizen or as a representative of the city.
Hi, everyone. Again, it's Jessica Green. I'm the Assistant City Manager, and I am speaking today from the viewpoint of the Economic Development Director for the City of Oxford. And I'm speaking just briefly on the 22 South Beach, the Elms Hotel Annex. And I want to say thank you to the Planning Commission, all the hard work that you do. I very highly value it. In this particular case, they're being asked to go through both the planning and the HAPC process again and for their proposed hotel annex. And I would just like to speak to the fact that their approvals expired during a pandemic, and what a turbulent and crazy year we had, especially in the hotel industry, where their business across the country that they own shut down, and I can't even imagine the stress. And so I guess I'm asking you to either consider an extension or consider like a rapid process, if we could, so they don't have to go through a long process again, because not much has changed, or nothing actually has changed with their proposal. So I'm just speaking to it as a supportive business practice to support this development, and I would thank you for your consideration of that in the future, not necessarily today. Thanks. That's all tonight.
All right. As a matter of practice, we don't engage in conversation, but as Jessica stated, she was speaking on behalf of one of our directors. This is just for the record, this is something that Sam Perry, myself, and Chris Skoglund had discussed, and there were changes that we felt were important. And there's more than what was simply stated. So we are definitely open to entertaining it, but there's, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story I think needs to be discussed. So thank you for your contribution and comments.
Thank you.
Moving on to reports from commissions, boards, committees, and staff. So with absolutely no sequence other than Mr. Perry.
I'll go ahead and get mine out of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I just have one tonight, which is that you may or may not recall there was a temporary relief on temporary business signs that we did as a result of the pandemic back last May. So we're looking at having a date where we would actually stop that relief and start saying no again, if you will, for banners and yard signs and things like that. So we're currently looking at July to kind of start reinforcing some of those things again. So if you notice the flutter flags or the dancing men on College Corner Pike, that's the type of thing that our ordinance prohibits. But as part of that process, we are thinking about evaluating some permanent changes. So as you're looking around town and you see temporary signs that you like or don't like, if you have some feedback you want to provide to myself, that would be helpful as we consider some potential changes in the future that would be on more permanent basis. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. While we're with staff, Mr. Moore, do you have anything that you would like to report not on the agenda? All right. Thank you. And I will start up in the corner with Mr. Keebler. Do you have anything to report? All right. Thank you, sir. Dr. Prithridge.
I'll just report kind of from council that the Lake Forest subdivision was approved and is now going forward towards a final with some of the conditions changed. Something that the Planning Commission has been interested in the past is you guys may have read that the Amtrak platform the design is under contract. So things are actually seem like they're moving forward there. And I'll just stop with that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dana, do you have anything to report? You're on mute. There we go, sir.
All right, thank you. The CIC, the business school students in the CIC presented their findings, their business plan, their finding as to what is the most viable new business in Greater Oxford. What should be the most viable business in Greater Oxford was the aim of their study. And they came out with, I thought, a great analysis, and they came out to two different possibilities. One was solar panels, going into business with selling and installing solar panels. The second one was growing hemp. And unless you think that that's something to laugh at, go ahead and laugh. But I thought they made a very, very strong case that actually growing hemp in this area and working with farmers would be useful and could happen. So I present that to you as something that you might want to actually follow up on at some point. Thank you. End of matter.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Bracken, do you have anything to report?
Yes, actually, much of it is the same as before. We're still working on promoting solar. I wanted to thank our PSP teams from the Institute of Environment and Sustainability. They did a great job with inventorying greenhouse gases and also resiliency. So that's much appreciated. Still working on pollination things, also looking into retention basins, riparian buffers, things like that, best practices. And a new thing that we might be getting to is that we might have found some possible solutions for addressing some of the methane emissions from our landfill, potentially through biofilters and/or flaring. So we're going to be looking into that going forward. That's about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Ms. Rosenberg.
I actually don't have anything to report, except that the steering committee that I'm representing planning on will be meeting in a couple of weeks, and housing. We did meet, but we really mostly just followed up on goals that we have. So there's not much to report there. That's it.
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Ms. Blackmar, do you have anything that you would like to report?
Can everyone hear me actually?
Yeah.
This is not my usual computer. From our Parking and Transportation Advisory Board, we're starting to look at parking rates and trying to figure out how those should be adjusted. And we are beginning the transportation part of the comprehensive plan update, which looks like it'll be a really interesting discussion. But nothing big news to report from that commission. And I also just wanted to say, I don't know if this is the appropriate moment. I wanted to commend the Community Development Department for their production of the What's Happening There GIS story map. I just think that is such a great best practice in communication. And just really helps proactively engage our community with what we're working on. And it's part of, I think, just hard work and really great communication that our community development department does. So I wanted to just say, I thought that is just so great. It's so helpful to us. And, would love to support future work like that.
All right.
Yes.
And I, just from HAPC, we meet tomorrow to discuss the 22 Beach Street Certificate of Appropriateness that Ms. Green referred to last month. And ironic, we were talking about this earlier, is I had the opportunity to meet Pastor Ellis and Mr. Eller because they presented to the HAPC. So now it's sequenced here. So that's the easiest report I've had to give because you guys will get to live out what my report would be. So I believe I've hit everybody. So moving on, we'll move on from reports and go into new business. So the new business is PC 2021-11, 22 North College Avenue. It's a conditional use approval. It's to change the current use from a restaurant/bar to a restaurant/church. As I said, Pastor Ellis and Mr. Eller are here to present. Mr. Moore, I will let you take it from here. Actually, I apologize.
Do you need a motion to enter into public hearing?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Mr. Dana, Mr. Keebler beat you to it. So the record will reflect Dr. Prithridge making the motion and Mr. Keebler for public hearing. All those in favor, please raise your hand to adjourn to public hearing. Let the record reflect everyone has to the affirmative. Now, Mr. Moore, you can take the floor, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll begin by pulling up my slideshow for everyone. Okay. Okay, let me know if, oh, what happened here? Screen sharing has stopped. Appears we're having some technical difficulties tonight. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can pull it back up again and try again. Let's see here. Okay, I've got it reopened now. I'm going to try and share it again. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, I'll go ahead and begin then. So tonight's only case on the agenda is a conditional use for place of worship at 22 North College Avenue. This is case number PC-2021-11. And hit the wrong button, sorry about that. So some quick details on the application. We're joined tonight by Pastor Tom Ellis. He is the pastor of the Calvary Church, which is located in Springdale, so not too far away. The property owner is Nara Properties, represented by Joseph Kang, who is not with us tonight. Mr. Greg Eller is the architect on the project, and the site area totals a little over 10,000 square feet approximately for the overall site. The current zoning is RO, Office Residential District. And again, the proposal is to establish a place of worship use. This is a little bit different of a case because the property was previously used for a restaurant for many years. Most recently, it was used as a Sushi Nara. It was a Japanese restaurant that closed in April of 2020. And so the owner, the current owner of the property, you may have seen his letter in your packet, basically acknowledging that he would like to extend the restaurant use, which just so happens to be a non-conforming use in the RO district, which is primarily meant for residential and then commercial office, and not so much service-based commercial uses like those for restaurants and bars. But this just so happens to be one that has been a restaurant for decades and has closed. So normally with a non-conforming use, if it ceases for a period of a year or more, then the use will go away. But we have been informed by legal counsel that as long as there is a letter that we receive in time, and as long as there is movement toward reestablishing that use, that is an effective means to essentially retain the legal rights for that. And what the church is proposing is to essentially turn the property at 22 North College. The historic name of the property is the Alexander House. They would like to install a coffee shop use, which we basically fit into the same category as a restaurant, but that would be in conjunction with church use. So I'll get into the details on that here in a moment. But just to begin here, so to orient you with where this is located, I'm sure many of you have traveled this corner many, many times. This is a very prominent corner in town. It's right off of US 27 where it does the little jog there on North College Avenue. So this is on the southwest corner of the intersection of College and Church. So just to get you oriented here, so Circle K is right down in this location. Hopefully you can see my cursor there. The Art Center, of course, is down here 1 block to the south off of High Street and College and Elm Street. And then the city building would just be a little bit further down off the map. There's also another commercial building that is just to the east there. That was the former location of another church, the Vineyard Church, which has since moved out to Oxford Riley Road. So here's a look at the same extent, but showing the zoning classifications as well as the historic district boundaries. So you can see this black line that is running along the alleyways here and then along West High Street. That is the Uptown Historic District boundary. So everything that is to the right and below that line is within the Uptown Historic District. So you can see, of course, that this property, this landmark property is within that district. The property is on the National Register of Historic Places. And just a kind of a crash course, if you will, on the RO zoning. It's really meant as a transition district between the more business-oriented mixed-use area of Uptown, which is the darker red color, the UP Uptown District, and then the mile square residential districts that surround it. So it's sort of a blend between residential and compatible commercial uses, those that don't have a lot of impacts or effects that may affect the residential uses in a negative manner. So it's mainly limited to, professional offices, uses like barber shops, insurance offices, that kind of thing is what our code prescribes as permitted uses in the RO, with less emphasis on, restaurants, bars, uses that may produce more noise or a greater amount of effect coming into contact with residential use. Okay, so looking to our comprehensive plan. So I've identified the site as a small little red rectangle there. So this falls within an area that the comp plan identifies as a neighborhood enhancement area. And the goal within this purple area is to stabilize and enhance the existing neighborhoods through continued maintenance and improving property that is done in a way that helps reinforce the traditional character that's already present. So we see this proposal as fulfilling the objectives of this particular concept area to reutilize, rehabilitate this historic structure, the Alexander House. We feel that this is very much in line with the comprehensive plan and what it calls for in this particular area of town. Okay, so then here are some site photos. So obviously a very beautiful historic building. Like I mentioned, it's on the National Register. And just a brief historical background, there's a lot more details, of course, in your staff report, but it was originally built in 1869. It was previously inhabited by 2 different doctors. And then, of course, it was a restaurant for several decades. I'm aware it was, I think, called the Alexander Restaurant. That was long before my time, of course. And then, of course, it was Sushi Nara for many years as well. And this exemplifies a Greek revival and Italianate styling. And the front porch that you see here is a classical revival style. So there's a lot of architectural styles that are represented with the structure itself. And then these are kind of some photos of areas that you wouldn't normally see from the street. So there's kind of the patio area that's in the back that has some awning coverings over it. There is a deck up at the top of the structure with some stairs. and then another back patio area with a brick wall. And then this is a view from the top of that deck. There was an addition that was actually built in 1880. So originally the building was in an L shape, and then the addition filled in the middle of that L. So now it's more rectangular footprint wise. And probably the most unique feature of the structure is this 2-story portico that has the Doric columns on it. It's a really, really neat part of the building. And then here's some historic photos. So the oldest photo I was able to find from the National Register information was from 1907. One kind of cute difference that I noticed, so there's this railing here from the older photograph, of course, the balcony railing, that eventually ended up disappearing by the 80s, but that was resurrected in a way. If you look at the current condition, that has been put back in a sense. So you can see it's kind of going back to what its original look and feel was. Another notable characteristic, so this building here in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, this was actually a carriage house that was behind the structure. So you can see a little bit of it right here in this location. This structure no longer exists. So originally the lot was much longer than it is today. It stretched from, this is College Avenue right here. It stretched all the way to the alley. So the carriage house was in this location here. Back in 2007, the lot was split into 2 different lots. So now this is on a separate lot. So effectively it was a 15,000 square foot lot. They did a split where they split off 5,000 square feet there on the western side, tore that old structure down, rebuilt a single family home, and then left the 10,000 square feet that we of course see today with the original historic building that sits upon it. So here's a bird's eye view looking north. Obviously here is North College, here is West Church, and then here's a view looking to the south. So we can refer back to these as may be needed. Okay, so on to the details of the application. This is a submitted site plan. This was actually the original site plan that was given to us with the conditional use application. And hopefully you all noticed there were some notes that I added to the plan sheets to differentiate between the original plans, and then there were some revised plans that were actually submitted for HAPC's review. So I want to make sure both of those were represented, but more or less it's probably about 90 to 95% still the same proposal between the plans. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and move to the next slide here. So this is the original first floor plan that was given to us. And essentially they're proposing to keep the building as it remains today with a few improvements. So it's definitely a reuse, a rehabilitation, almost an adaptive reuse by adding the church aspects. But the first floor plan is essentially more of the coffee shop style use. So just to walk through some of the numbers here. So number 1, that's just previously it was a ramp feature that the architect was thinking they would need to swing around there to an elevator lift, which is at number 2. So to bring the property into greater compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act standards for accessibility, they're looking to add a glass elevator lift to the west side of the building. So it's basically the rear side that would enable those to be able to get up to the deck there on the back side of the building and then enter the second floor because at present there's no elevator in the building. It's just a staircase. So that is a feature they're proposing. The 3s here are restrooms. The 4 is just a relocated dishwashing sink. Number 5 there in the middle would be basically the coffee bar part of the restaurant. Number 6 is the condiments bar, and then they're just looking to add some flat screen monitors in a couple of the rooms. So they're really envisioning this as kind of a community space, a gathering space, a place to come, meet up with friends, have study groups, that type of thing. I think is kind of the atmosphere that they're going for here. And then finally, number 8, this is another accessibility feature. So they're proposing a railed ramp to access the existing outdoor deck area, which is in the back there. So this ramp would be leading out toward the North College Avenue side. And there is a condition related to that, related to lot coverage. With our zoning code in terms of accessibility, the code actually offers an exemption for ramps and things of that nature setback wise, but it does not from a perspective of lot coverage. So we're hoping to allow for this ramp feature to be added by simply acknowledging a waiver to the code standard for lot coverage. I think all they really need is about 2.1% extra coverage in order to get that done. And I believe that's condition number 2 that's recommended. So that's walking through the first floor. So looking to the second floor plan. So number 1 here is just the upper portion of that elevator lift. And then they are proposing an auditorium space here on the, I guess it'd be the northern side of the floor plan. So the second floor is has a more direct correspondence to the church use that they would like to establish, and hence the reason for the conditional use process, because churches are conditional use in RO. So that's essentially the main reason why we are here tonight to consider this case. But just to walk through the rest of the features here, there's a couple restrooms. They're proposing to add some railing here on the staircase and add an audiovisual booth here in the back of the auditorium. Overall, it looks like they're pretty much keeping the same floor layout, just making some improvements, updating the structure according to what their needs are to activate it, if you will, as a coffee shop and a church. These are the original sheets that showed kind of that glass elevator lift design, which is in the back portion there, the western side of the lot. And just so everybody is aware, so HAPC, as Mr. Watt had mentioned, has already seen this application. They have approved the application. There were a few conditions that went with it, and in particular to the elevator lift, I think there is a slide later where I'll explain a little bit about that. But essentially, all you really need to be aware of is that HAPC has approved the exterior changes that they've proposed to the building. So I'd like to show you the latest elevations just one at a time here, and just kind of point out some of the new features. So this is the east or front elevation that faces North College. So you can see there's the ramp feature that they would like to install. They like to put in some exterior lighting, and then they will be doing a compliant sign. I believe it complies with all of the relevant code requirements. It's a freestanding sign. The name of the coffee house at this moment that they're proposing is Red Life House, or Red Life Coffee House is the name that they're proposing. So that's what shows up there. Here is a view of the south side elevation. So you can see the portico feature here with the columns. You see kind of a side view of that ramp feature with the railing, and then you can see the glass elevator lift in the back. The rear elevation, so apart, of course, from the noticeable glass elevator, there's a couple different storage bins here, and they're intending to store lawn equipment in those. And then finally with the north side, so for trash, refuse containers, they're thinking that they'll need 6 of those to take care of the coffee shop use that's on the first floor. And they're looking to screen the location of those. They would basically go up against the side of the building here facing West Church Street. They'd like to screen those from the street by using some evergreen shrubs. So that's what shows up here on this image. This also gives you another view of that Red Life Coffee House sign there on the corner. Now we arrive at one of the notable HAPC conditions. So with that glass elevator where it was, it will definitely be visible from the public right-of-way along West Church Street. So what the HAPC was thinking was, is there maybe an alternate location where it could be better hidden from view, probably to better preserve the architectural view of the structure. So that was asked of the applicant to look into, and they did a wonderful job looking into it and documenting it for us. So they did look at this alternate location to basically tuck it into this corner here. But that is not a feasible location because as it turns out, it only leaves about 2 feet of clearance for a wheelchair to get through and into the elevator itself. So they would prefer to keep it where it was originally, as it was in the original conditional use application, and keeping it there along the western wall, if you will. And then finally, I'm going to note there's this change here. I'd mentioned that there was this curved ramp around the elevator lift location. Upon further assessment, the architect feels that there's that they have the ability to basically preserve the existing walkway that's there that goes toward the back patio. So this curved ramp feature will not be necessary. And then this gives you a better view, of course, of the evergreen shrubs, which are kind of hashed out there for your view. So some nice landscaping there to kind of soften the look of the building. There's also a kitchen door here along the side of the building. I think it's actually right in this location. So they felt that the storage of the trash made the most sense, even though it's on the street side, which typically if we were designing something brand new, we wouldn't want to have the street view be of trash. But I think what they have here makes a lot of sense, given that they are using a structure and a site that has already pretty much been developed, and the preservation of this building is definitely something that we would want to see. So, okay. And then kind of the last topic I wanted to touch on was parking, which is typically a concern that conditional uses address. This particular application, we're addressing parking in a very different way than we would if this were, a brand new development where we're essentially designing new off-street parking or something to that effect. So there's really not any reason or any room for that matter for any sort of off-street parking accommodations on this site. So by establishing this use effectively, any patrons or church members that are going to be attending at this location who will be driving into the location, that parking demand is going to need to be accommodated by the existing on-street or public parking capacities. So this was an issue that staff brought to the applicant's attention, and we essentially offered to do a parking study for them. So we charged them an hourly rate, and I went out on Sunday, April the 18th, and using 1/4 of a mile study area as the scope, which basically amounts to a 5-minute walk from the site, that delivered the following results. So within this roughly 2-hour span, it revealed an available amount of spaces. There was 398 available spaces that were documented during this time frame. 372 of which were on-street spaces, including 14 accessible, which are those spaces that have the handicap signs in front of mainly church facilities, where it's certain hours of the day where those are reserved for those that have the tags as accessible spaces. And then there were also 26 spaces available at lot 52, which of course is there at the corner of East Church and North Main. The city parking garage, as you can see down here, it did not make the 5-minute walk shed, I guess I'll call it. So the spaces that would have been available in that garage were not captured as a part of the study, but I'm certain that there were plenty of spaces available in there as well. So at least as it pertains to the Sunday morning timeframe, I think this pretty conclusively says that there's plenty of capacity to absorb up to 75 attendees is what they're projecting for their upstairs use in the auditorium as a max of 75. So I think this pretty well documents that there's plenty of capacity, at least for this particular time of the week and time of day. Okay, so on to the recommendation. Only 3 conditions this time to consider. We are recommending approval of the application. The first 2 conditions are code waivers. So the first one has to do with business hours. So As I mentioned before, the RO, Office Residential District, it's trying to control the nature and the impacts of business usage in what is supposed to be a primarily residential zone. And just reading into the code, not necessarily knowing, exactly what the thoughts of those were who wrote the code, but I'm willing to bet that the reason for our standard limiting the business hours from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. has to do with that very thing, to try to prohibit or keep uses out of the zone that would have late night business hours. The church is looking to operate between the range of 7 a.m. to 10, so just adding an extra hour. And we don't feel that this is a big deal. So we're recommending a waiver of it. The second condition, I'd already hinted at that one before. It's basically the lot coverage waiver that's necessary to approve the ramp up to the existing deck. And then the third condition is to add a bike rack in front. This is kind of an unusual case because bike racks are required in our commercial zone in general business. They are triggered whenever there is new off-street parking, vehicular parking that's provided. They're not currently required in the UP Uptown zone, which is a more dense sort of urban setting with storefronts built up, zero setbacks and so forth along High Street. This is kind of an unusual case because you've got plenty of lawn there, area in front of the structure. So I think it makes a lot of sense to put in a bicycle rack there. So just asking for the minimum of 3 bicycle parking spaces, which is exactly what would be required if this were zoned general business. And then I think that will conclude my presentation for now. I do have a series of slides after this that do contain the decision criteria. So Mr. Chair, if you'd like to use those, you're more than welcome.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, if you could keep those, we can go off unless Pastor Ellis and Mr. Eller need the slides. We could go to the Brady Bunch without the presentation. We can go to that so we can see each other. All right, thank you. If either of the applicants would like to speak, you are more than welcome to present anything additional to what Mr. Moore shared, clarify anything, and then after that, we will, we may have questions for you, and then after that, we'll do a public comment. So.
All right, well, my name's Tom Ellis, pastor at the Calvary Church in Springdale, and thank you for your time and consideration for this project and what we hope brings value to the city of Oxford. Kind of 4 things we think of when we think of bringing value in this particular project. Number 1, certainly to the historic building. We love the architecture of this building, and I know our architect Greg Eller has done a great job trying to look at that and maintain that, and we hope we can add value to just the architecture layout and what that building means to the city. Secondly, certainly the coffee shop. Our plan, and just to clarify a little bit of detail, our plan right now would be to operate a coffee shop Monday through Saturday. So it would be a full operating coffee shop from morning to evening, either 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That would be Monday through Saturday. And so that space during those times would be open for coffee, obviously, and community use, as well as study groups and those kind of things. And so we see value added for that space, and in our understanding of even the coffee business and our consultants that we've worked with felt like that Oxford could use another coffee shop or 2 and would still serve the community well. So we feel like we would not be oversaturating Oxford with coffee. And so we feel like we can add value that way. Third component to what we feel like we can add value to is the community. by offering support groups and those kind of things in the evening, whether it be addiction recovery or grief share, those kind of support groups. We feel like it's what we do here in Springdale with our church, and we provide these kind of services to the community and is well received in our community. So that component would hopefully add value to the city of Oxford. And third, people of faith who wish to worship and those kind of things on a Sunday. We would obviously want to add value in that capacity, and certainly that's at my heart and passion as pastor. So that's our heart for it and kind of our motivations behind it. And we, again, thank you for your consideration of the project. I'll let our architect, Greg Eller, add any comments to what was presented by Zach. I want to thank Zach and Sam Perry again for your assistance in walking us through this as well.
Yes, I'm Greg Eller, and I'm really just here to answer questions. Zach, you did a great job of presenting really what the plan is. I don't have a whole lot more really to add to that. You know, we did look at moving the elevator in that corner, and I also looked at rotating and some different ways of getting it in there, and it just wouldn't fit in the corner. So, you know, we just felt like it was better back to where it was. I think it'd be easier to install and maintain as well, not being in a corner. So, and then lastly, that piece that's in front of it is a one-story addition. So even in the corner, it would still be visible from the street. So, you know, I felt like it was a reasonable accommodation with what we're doing. So, and then, you know, the other thing we talked about was, you know, we're going to work with you guys as we develop in terms of paint colors and details as we get into renovations. You know, we're exploring what original colors were for the house and the trim. So, you know, that's definitely in our mind is to work with what the historical fabric was. We can certainly answer questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. If anybody from the commission has questions for the applicant or Zach, I should have offered that opportunity based on the presentation or what they shared. Feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I can move on to the next step. All right, I do not see any indications of anyone who has questions for Mr. Moore or the applicants. So Mr. Perry, at this time, we would entertain any public comment related to this business item. Is there anybody who's indicated that they would like to speak?
No, sir, there are none at this time.
All right, thank you. I will entertain a motion to close public hearing. Dr. Prithridge with a motion, Mr. Dana with a second. All those in favor, please indicate with your hand and let the record show all commission members voted in favor. So public hearing is closed. We will have a discussion and then I will entertain a motion and we can go through the decision standards at that time. So I'll open it up for any commission members to share their thoughts briefly, and then we can move on to the formality or the formal, sorry, not formality, the formal side of things. So would anyone like to speak? Mr. Dana.
Muted, Steve.
Okay. All right. What I am impressed by is simply what I would call, frankly, a textbook case. I think this particular project represents for me a sort of a textbook case of how historical sensitivities with architectural solving the problems of the ramp and the elevator in particular, and the balance and strength that it brings to the neighborhood. In other words, it's not just the building itself that impresses me. It's in its context of this neighborhood. It would be particularly valuable to do as the architect and the restorer has said, the owner, because I think this is what we're talking about that we want for Oxford. If I could simply add by saying, if one had to say, well, what would you pick for inclusion in the comprehensive plan? Can you give me an idea of what sort of project would work? I would say, yes, here it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dana. Dr. Prithridge, I saw you on mute. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, I'll just follow up, Steve. I want to thank the applicant and the architect for proposing this investment in our community. It really is a keystone structure. There's been some deferred maintenance there. We were sorry to see Sushinara go, but I mean, as a community member, I'm happy to see this kind of investment. I think it's a creative and adaptive use and well designed. From the conditional use point of view, you know, we're just looking, are there negative impacts that need to be mitigated? I think churches are only in this category because, you know, churches can be bigger than this with more of a parking footprint. So the fact that it is at this scale, at this location, it's wonderful you did the parking analysis, but, you know, we're happy to have churches and coffee shops in our walkable uptown district. So the more you can accommodate the pedestrians and the bicycles. So anyway, yes, this was kind of a no-brainer, and I'm just happy to see the adaptive reuse of the structure and the creative use. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prithridge. Mr. Keebler.
I would only point out that I think the parking study was slightly skewed because the other two churches that are on Church Street aren't meeting at full capacity. They're very limited capacity. So to check it out at that time, I think the fact that you came up with 392 and this had 75, I don't think makes a heck of a lot of difference. But I think if it were a typical church Sunday, your parking study would have tremendously different totals as far as available spaces. Because I guarantee you lot 52 would have been full with just the Methodist and Presbyterian Church, as well as at least 3 blocks on Church Street. But I don't think that that's enough to suggest that this won't work. And I too am glad to see an adaptive reuse of this house. It's a beautiful house. I have to tell you, I've been around long enough that I remember when the Alexanders lived there. And so, I said, I can remember when the Alexanders lived in that house.
Right.
Owner Alexander. So, yes, we want to see that house remain steadfast, kept up well and stuff as that corner of our community. So I'm pleased to be able to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Keebler. Any other commissioners? Would you like to contribute to the discussion? Before I entertain a motion, I do want to thank Mr. Eller. I am the perpetrator of the request on the elevator, and I think he did an incredible job of trying to accommodate our curiosity and request to see if it could be slightly more hidden. And after seeing that, I just wanted to thank you because the rest of the proposal was very solid. It was very straightforward, and that was definitely my my curiosity and request. So I appreciate your due diligence on that. It's much appreciated. And to echo Dr. Prithridge's point, HAPC always looks for the things to be as minimal in a disruption and continuity, you know, how things are copacetic to their surroundings. And we were pleased as a group that there was very minimal disruption and maximum actually improvement and restoration. So I just wanted to thank the applicants for being very receptive to what HAPC and in particular myself asked you to do. It was a heavy lift. I appreciate that. So I will, Mr. Keebler.
Move to approve PC 2021-11.
You were reading my mind,
Second.
sir. Ms. Rosenberg seconds. All right. So because of our decision criteria, if there are no objections, because this is pretty straightforward, or at least that's the impression I get from my colleagues on the commission, in the interest of brevity and not hearing myself talk, I will, Mr. Keebler made a motion to approve. I just want to clarify, as presented by staff with the 3 recommendations. Is that correct, sir? Okay. So I will do this in a expedited fashion. If any counselors have the discussion part, if any counselors have an objection to the presented A through N criteria, please speak now. Otherwise, we'll move forward as Mr. Keebler has motioned.
Just for the sake of the minutes, I guess I would just say that I believe, and perhaps we concur, that they have been met as reflected in the staff report. So that would, to me, constitute the administrative record that the staff report reflects that the conditions have been met, and we don't have objections to that. So.
Perfect. I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Keebler. I would imagine you are agreeable to what Dr. Prithridge said.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So Mr. Keebler's motion was to accept as presented by staff with the 3 conditions. Also the not amendment, but the observation of Dr. Prithridge that all the conditions of the decision criteria A through N have been met and noted by staff. Mr. Perry, we do a roll call on this, sir. All right, I will hand it over to Mr. Perry for our vote.
And I will start with Ms. Rosenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Mr. Keebler,
Yes.
Ms. Blackmore,
Yes.
Mr. Dana,
Yes.
and Mr. Watt.
Yes. All right, the motion passes. And from there, that was our new business item. So thank you to the applicant. We appreciate that. Zach, another bang up job. Thank you, sir. Moving on, I do not know of any old business on the agenda. And administrative approvals, we didn't, well, we had them. Sam, would you like to give a quick update on the administrative approvals that you and I have done?
We did several this week, and we were planning to put them in the next month's packet.
Perfect. That works for me, sir. And just so you know, they were done yesterday morning at about 10 a.m. So it is an interest of time to have them presented to you. Ms. Blackmore?
I just had one announcement that I forgot to make earlier, which is that Age Friendly Oxford is hosting a workshop on universal design and your home with the intent of assisting people who are planning for the future and to age in place. That's going to be on the 27th at 11 a.m. We're working on getting it on the web. But if you are on any of the Oxford Seniors mailing lists or the Age Friendly mailing list, you should have gotten it. And I can also send it to make sure it's posted in City Hall so that others are familiar with this event that's taking place. And we hope to, in addition to doing this workshop, which is more targeted toward a consumer, do a future workshop targeted towards a real estate professionals and builders, so that there's kind of more adoption of universal design in our community.
Thank you. I appreciate your work on that as well. Dr. Prithridge?
I just wanted to just raise something. Sometimes we go through cases, things come up that I think maybe if we can put them on our list for the future. And while we're talking about these conditional uses, some things that come out to me is that we always are granting waivers to 35% lot coverage because that's not a good number for the mile square. So I hope that we put that on our list to come back to, because we keep granting waivers when the code itself could just need to be changed. It's not a huge change. The other thing I'm thinking about is the RO. We have in the past talked about permitting more uses in the RO, like the uses we just thought was okay. And so it happens to be a conditional, a non-conforming use. So legally they have to keep it going. But if we think this is the right use for the RO, we may in the future want to talk about making it part of the RO. Just so that's, I just want to raise that as something that if we felt like this was a good use and we're good with this, then maybe it's not a one-off, that we might want to look at our code. So that's just a point I want to make, Juan.
Sir.
Well, if I could just follow up with a couple questions. In the context of that discussion, then on the 35% lot coverage leading to a large number of waivers because it doesn't work in that area, does staff or do you have an idea of what that right number is?
Mr. Moore, Mr. Perry?
Or
Well, I guess I will mention that, and I think this is actually mentioned in the staff report too. It acknowledges that our residential districts in the mile square have a coverage limit of 45%. So I found it a bit odd that the RO district, which is supposed to be this transition between, 100% coverage area, which is uptown, to, residential, which is 45, that it happens to be 35 in the RO. I think that was a bit odd, that it should at least match with the mile square standard. So I think that would at least help get us to a better point when it comes to those particular areas along Church Street and Walnut.
and I want to add that about a month or so ago, I happened to be speaking with the former law director, Steve McHugh, who was around for a long time. And we were talking about this very issue, and that if you see these continued need to create conditional or waivers, then the code isn't working, because you shouldn't have to be getting to that place. And Steve did acknowledge that he was aware that there were some places in the code that probably should be reviewed on that basis. Then my other question was, so I'm clear when the conversation, if it comes up in the future on the RO, are you suggesting that additional uses would be placed in the conditional use category or more of a permitted use?
That's just a thought. We've experimented more in lines with our comprehensive goals of having more walk-to commercial, mixed-use commercial embodied, for example, in the neighborhood commercial zone, that we have a limited set of commercial uses that were appropriate in a neighborhood setting. We never got there with the RO, but this kind of use is. It's a limited commercial use that's compatible with residential. So we talked about it, just never got there. We just haven't revised the RO in a long time, I think, which is why the numbers are out of sync. It could just be worth doing at some point.
If I could ask one more question, then I'll be done.
And it's Mr. Keebler.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'd also like to get some sense of that I would think that the idea of the conditional use, since the RO is by definition a transitional neighborhood, conditional use might be preferable to maintain a level of control rather than going straight to a permitted because of the transitional component. Okay, I'm seeing that nods. All right, thanks. Sorry for that injection.
No, and you were fine. I just knew Mr. Keebler had his hand up, and I wanted him to know I saw him, and he had the next privilege.
The only thing I want to point out is when you raise the limits, it just gives developers another thing to come in for waivers for. Okay? They'll never live within your limits. I don't care what they are. The only limit they'll live within is the 100% lot coverage. Okay? It's that simple. Now, 35 might not be appropriate. I might agree with that. But when you start talking about the whole mile square, I don't care what your limit is. If it's not 100%, the developers are going to keep trying to get one more room. Okay? So please keep that in mind.
Mr. Keebler, thank you. Mr. Dana.
I just know we don't want to have conversation, but I did want to reply or ask Mr. Keebler, if that's the case, and your experience, which is vast, I know, with developers talks about 100%, what then is the solution?
I think the solution is to keep it a reasonable limit and still be willing to give waivers when the conditions require it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying there shouldn't ever be any, but I just believe that there comes a time, for example, this ramp or these kinds of things, where the solutions just aren't there unless you grant a waiver.
All right, thank you.
And I would say that really is the key. It's really a case-by-case basis that you look at it individually, and that's the critical
That's
component.
what you have to do. I always said when I was sitting on council, I was told one time that that's arbitrary and capricious, and all I could say was, that's why we get paid the big bucks to make those decisions.
Well, so what I hear is, and if Mr. Moore and Mr. Perry, I think you've heard what folks are looking at. Nothing binding, nothing official, but maybe in one of the next meetings or sometime this summer when we have a light agenda, maybe if you could offer a little perspective, just to give us an idea. I think that would help us settle on that happy medium, or identify that we don't need to do anything. So.
It certainly does seem incongruous that you go from 100% to 35% and then to 45%.
It's almost like having a moat around uptown.
Yeah.
Well, my hope was we'd get done in an hour, but then we had this conversation. But I won't complain at an hour and 3 minutes. That's pretty good for us.
Or one other thing I have to point out.
Yes.
That I was on council when the previous owner of this property requested us to change the zoning to make this lot, David was there too, to make this lot one of the in the UP district. And that would have allowed 100% lot coverage on this lot. And it was turned down unanimously by both planning and council.
And we appreciate that. So. All right. Well, folks, I appreciate everyone's contributions, perspective, and service. I am happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
That was a speed race. It was Mr. Dana and Miss Rosenberg. However, the minute taker wants to reflect that. We have a motion and a second.
Ladies first.
All right. Miss Rosenberg with the motion, Mr. Dana with the second. All those in favor of adjourning, raise your hand. The record reflect it is unanimous. Everyone have a great night.
Night, everyone.
Thanks, Zach and Sam, for great staff work on this one.
Yes, indeed.
All right, see you.